the release of the report could lead to a greater risk that is posed to U.S. facilities and individuals all around the world. So the administration has taken the prudent steps to ensure that the proper security precautions are in place at U.S. facilities around the globe. But that said, and this is the last key part, that said, the administration strongly supports the release of this declassified summary of the report.
The report is the Senate Intelligence Committee report on enhanced interrogation of terrorists after the 9/11 attacks, the so-called torture report. The chair of that committee, Dianne Feinstein, Democrat from California, told the LA Times this about why it needs to come out. The interrogations undermine societal and constitutional values that we are very proud of, she said. Anybody who reads this is going to never let this happen again. There are a lot of people weighing in on this report coming out. It's expected to come out tomorrow morning. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. Charles Lane, opinion writer for the Washington Post. And syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles.
Well, when you hear the president's spokesman say that they know that it could endanger Americans, you ask yourself, why would the president insist on the release of this, knowing that it could lead to the death of Americans serving under him as commander-in-chief, and Americans held hostage, and Americans in positions where they are vulnerable? What exactly is the gain here? Do we not know about this already? Does it have to be done in detail and released now? His own Secretary of State is going around trying to get the timing, he says. In other words, trying to get this withheld because he knows the danger. And it isn't only the direct danger to Americans abroad or being held hostage. The second casualty will be the timidity, as your former CIA Director Hayden has said it will impose on the CIA in the future. Will you ever take a risk in defense of the national security if you think you're going to be hung out to dry later? But most important, I think, is the fact, what intelligence service abroad is going to help us when they are going to be exposed and pilloried around the world? The administration always talks about smart diplomacy. You know, the other guys, Bush and others, use brute force, sort of thoughtless, the use of American power. But they're real smart. They use human intelligence. And we're going to lose all this. We're not going to have any allies in the world. And because we have so little human intelligence as a result of a drone program that kills our enemy and never captures them, nobody has gone to Guantanamo in the 6 years of the Obama administration. We rely on the eyes and ears of other allies. Who are going to help us after this? Nobody.
Chuck, obviously, Secretary Kerry had some concerns, wanted to ask Senator Feinstein whether she would delay this. It does not appear like it's going to be delayed, but they are hearing from allies around the globe concerns about the fallout.
Well, you know, I don't know if this is a correction, but add something to what Charles said. This is not President Obama's decision formally to release this or not. His spokesman said he supports it, but it is up to Dianne Feinstein. This is a congressional report, and that's an independent branch of government that can release this.
You don't think he could stop it if he wanted to?
I just said it is not formally his decision. It is completely in the hands of the intelligence.
What about in reality?
It's an Intelligence Committee document, and she's the chairman of the committee, and it's up. And John Kerry himself today said it is up to her whether or not to release it. So that's,
well, how much of the decision has to do with the CIA spying on the Senate committee during this whole process?
Good question. I just want to say that every single thing Charles said is true about all the risks and costs that are associated with this, all the dangers that we're assuming now. And I would add, none of that would be happening. We wouldn't have to worry about any of that if we had not waterboarded people in the first place. And that was controversial at the time, and a lot of people said this is not worth the damage to the United States' international reputation. It is not worth the risk. We put our allies at risk by implicating them in this torture in the first place.
We are where we are, Chuck, right?
That's correct.
Here's where we are. The program ended when the president came in. So it's a program that's no longer in place.
Correct.
So a report that retroactively looks at something that happened
that tells the American people within appropriate limitations what their government did is something we do in a democracy.
But how about a couple years from now? a few years. Here's
It's never a good time, Brett. It's never a good time to lay bare the ugly workings of an intelligence agency. We've done it before in our history. We've done it before.
Yeah, the Church report
and the Pike Commission report and others.
And what was the fallout from that?
It was over time. I don't know if you could argue that it decreased our national security, but I think it was part of a necessary process of reform of those agencies in the 70s when those were brought out.
Here is former CIA director, former NSA director, General Mike Hayden.
It's politically driven. The report has come out of one side of the Senate Intelligence Committee, only the Democrats. And the Democrats, despite stern warnings from the Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence, the Democrats are trying to force it out the door before they lose control of the Senate, because they know the report won't see the light of day after they lose control. The agency as a group and individual agency officers already feel betrayed. They feel as if they've been tried and convicted in absentia, that they've not been able to present a defense, and now, more particularly, a lot of officers fear there will be enough details in the report that their true identities could be revealed.
Steve.
Well, look, I think what you hear from Chuck is an intellectually honest case that raises some moral objections and practical objections to releasing the report and to the interrogation techniques as they were practiced. That is not what we're going to see tomorrow, because as Mike Hayden suggests, this is a one-sided report. It was written by the Democratic staff of the Intelligence Committee. Only Olympia Snowe, as a Republican, signed off on the initial, backed the initial investigation and stuck with it. This is a political report. It should be seen as a political report, but it won't be seen as a political report. If you believe, as Chuck apparently does, that we need to have a national discussion about this and take a look back and do some introspection, this is not going to aid in that. I mean, if you look at the way that this report is being portrayed right now in the media, it is being called the Senate torture report everywhere. New York Times, everywhere. Time magazine wrote this about the report: it's an in-depth, well-researched document. How do we know that? The report isn't out. It's 499 pages, and that's how it's being characterized now, because everybody in the media wants to discuss this as a torture report. What I think the fundamental problem with the report, there are basically two. One is it takes abuses and excesses, and there were those, and makes them not the exceptions in this program, but the rule. That is going to be the way that the report is defined in this case. And the second problem, the second question is, were these techniques effective? The report concludes that they were not. There is abundant evidence that they were.
Yeah, I mean, the people intimately involved in it, many of whom said they were not interviewed in this process,
Right.
say that there was no actionable intelligence from any of this is not at all true. That's what they said.
Leon Panetta himself, a Democrat, the former head of CIA under Obama, has written in his book that the CIA got critical intelligence out of this. Now, and even there are a lot of people who are there at the time who have said this, but let's assume that was not the case. That would be a completely an easy, fat, irresponsible, retrospective analysis a decade later. Even if, in retrospect, some of this was unnecessary, how in God's name was anyone to know at the time that it would be unnecessary? If you were a CIA operative, we have just lost 3,000 Americans in the worst attack ever on the homeland. We know almost nothing about Al-Qaeda. We have to build an entire library of information about who they are, where they are, their methods, and everything else. And what you do is you try to get all the intelligence you can. And at the time, Feinstein and others were telling the CIA to get everything they could with no objection at the time, having been told about this. I think it is completely irresponsible. And whether or not it led directly to the killing of bin Laden is irrelevant. That was not the objective. It was to learn about Al-Qaeda, and we did.
Last word, Chuck.
I'm just going to say that my view of this doesn't actually depend on whether it was effective or ineffective. My view of it depends on whether or not it was a right thing to do in the first place to subject people to waterboarding. And all the people you're talking about were implicated in, they took that decision, and I think for all the reasons we're discussing, it's in hindsight it was a mistake.
But our own people were subjected to waterboarding in many cases as part of SEER training, and that's an intellectually honest debate. But the debate that we're about to have tomorrow will be over the effectiveness, and it's not intellectually honest the way it's portrayed.
Many people have tweeted in and dropped messages and posts on Facebook and emailed in, a lot of them saying if it endangers anybody now, why release it? But this might be the favorite response. Rob writes, it's a total farce and a distraction from the Jonathan Gruber witness testimony tomorrow.